This was a pretty mediocre compact sedan turned into a fire-breathing monster that dominated motorsport and still remains as one of the most successful cars in its class of all time. The Ford Sierra Cossie. Stuart Turner was given the job of Ford Europe's head of motorsport in 1983, and if you know anything about Ford Motorsport, in 1983 things were not going so well. Their Le Mans Group C program was a dud, the Escort Turbo project for the WRC was canned because of the Audi Quattro's all-wheel drive arrival, and the Capri was struggling in touring cars to say the least. Well, he figured touring cars, being based off of actual production models, would be the easiest to fix. So he went to Ford legend Walter Hayes. Now this was the guy who funded both the GT40 program at Le Mans and the DFV program in Formula 1. The DFV program also meant he had contacts with an engine builder in Britain called COSWORTH, who Stuart figured could build his racing engine. So he presented COSWORTH a T88 4-cylinder engine block from the Pinto. Not a great engine to build a race car off in theory, but it actually worked out quite well. COSWORTH bolted on the aluminum heads a massive turbocharger and called it the YBB. And they agreed to build it under one condition. Ford had to buy 15,000 engines rather than the 5,000 required for homologation. That was the easy step, though. Everything else was a pain. First, they tried using the Borg-Warner T5 transmission from the SVO Mustang. However, the high-revving COSWORTH engine proved to be too much for it. Therefore, Borg-Warner actually created a specifically focused assembly line just for this gearbox. Then there was the suspension. Now, they did have a bit of a head start with this, because Ford actually used the Merkur XR4Ti, which is just a great name for a terrible car, which was pretty much an American version of the Sierra, but Jack Roush of, Roush fame, competed the Merkur very successfully in the IMSA GTO class in 1985. And they took that suspension knowledge from the IMSA car and incorporated it into this Group A touring car. Then there was the bodywork. It was decided to use a Sierra as the base, and that decision actually made everybody happy. The racing guys liked the aerodynamic shape and the rear-wheel drive layout, while the marketing guys were eager to add some racing cred to the controversial Sierra road car. But there was a problem. Yes, it was very aerodynamic, but it didn't work above 180 miles an hour. It got good fuel economy, but after 300 kph, the rear of the car actually generated lift, which is not the type of aero you want to be generating. The only way to fix it was a massive rear wing, and when Ford dealers saw the whale tail, the massive intercooler ducts, the arch extensions, they figured they couldn't sell more than 1,500. Not 15,000. But finally, after some test driving and some begging on Hayes' part, Ford management approved the project, which meant it was launched at the end of 1985 as the Sierra RS COSWORTH. And 5,500 were sold in 2 years, so suck it, Ford marketing department. Just like the BMW M3, marketing departments have no concept of how to market a touring car, apparently. It makes a lot of sense why this one sold quite well, and it was only 5,000 pounds more than a base Sierra, but it didn't look like one, or go like one. You see, Ford wanted 180 horsepower from the YBB, so COSWORTH gave them 204 and said take it or leave it. That meant a sprint to 60 in 6.5 seconds and a top speed of 150 miles an hour. And when partnered with the LSD, the suspension trickery, and the hilarious rear wing, it was an absolute riot, both in the driving sense and the real sense. You see, it still had the locks of a normal Sierra in order to cut costs, which meant that you could easily get one for free. It was so likely to be stolen, insurance was more than the price of the car. But that was sort of irrelevant, because by the time that really took hold, The Sierra was already a massive success. The RS Cossie had made the Sierra, a controversial, sort of ugly duckling, into a fantastic, awesome car. But Ford engineers knew they could do better, and they wanted to make an evolution model that would make all other touring cars look like Model Ts. They came up with the RS 500. As the name suggests, only 500 were made. The engine was uprated 224 horsepower thanks to a new fuel pump, new oil pump, a bigger intercooler, a new front end which allowed more airflow into the engine, and a lip spoiler underneath the whale tail, so you can have a spoiler on top of your spoiler. It also came with an extra set of fuel injectors, which, while disconnected for the road car, on the race car, it was a bit crazy. Ford wanted a 300 horsepower touring car engine, so when you put the second set of injectors into the injection system, COSWORTH gave them 550 bhp. They won over 15 touring car titles around the world in Britain, Germany, Japan, New Zealand, and Australia. And in Australia, they were able to tune these things up to a reported 680 horsepower. It decimated Australian motorsport, winning the Sandown 500, the Wellington 500, and the Bathurst 1000 twice in a row. It even took an overall victory at the Spa 24 Hours in 1989 against BMW M3s, Toyota Supras, and Porsche 911s. And it even adventured off of tarmac into rallying. Granted, it was rear-wheel drive and it didn't really stand a chance against the all-wheel drive Delta Integrale, so it only won a single WRC rally at the Tour de Corse in 1988, but it did have a lot more success in national titles, with Jimmy McRae winning the British Rally Championship twice, and this rookie driver guy named Carlos Sainz winning the Spanish Rally Championship. It was a legend. I think it looks brilliant. There are a lot of people that hate it. It's sort of a love it or hate it style car because of the massive wing, but I think it looks brilliant, and it's one of Ford's greatest ever cars. Sure, the Mustang is known over here for being the car that gave performance to the masses, but in Britain, that's the Sierra. This is the European version of the Mustang, if you will. Taking a normal platform, so in Mustang's case the Falcon, or in this case the Sierra, and just sort of dialing it up to 11. But Ford still had like 10,000 engines lying around, so they made a second generation, called the Sierra Sapphire Cosworth in 1988. This one isn't nearly as well known, A, because it didn't really race as much, B, it's a 4-door sedan versus a 3-door hatch, and C, it has no brilliantly stupid rear wing, which is just disappointing. Granted, the small wing made it faster, but not by much. And it had more creature comforts like air conditioning and power windows, so it actually sold a lot better, 13,000 units. They actually had to order more engines, but it's definitely not the monster that the RS Cossie was. But in 1990, they continued forth with the Sierra Sapphire Cosworth 4x4. The entire Sierra lineup got a refresh in 1990, so they decided to add the biggest change to the Cosworth to date: four-wheel drive. Their goal was to make it actually competitive in the WRC. Sure, it added 100 kilograms to the car, but Cosworth reworked the YBB into the YBJ. It didn't work, and it only scored 2 second-place finishes by 92, but, I mean, it's interesting. It's one of Ford's first ever all-wheel drive sedans, which became a staple up until they switched to SUVs, and then it was replaced by the Escort. Now, we are actually going to talk about the Escort RS Cosworth, because it isn't really an Escort. They took a lightly modified Sierra Cossie chassis and drivetrain, and then threw an Escort body on it. So it had the RS 500's 224 horsepower, with an even bigger turbo, making 14 psi of boost at 3,500 RPM, and it had an even bigger whale tail on the rear, because that is how you do a Sierra Cossie, or in this case, an Escort Cossie. This thing was a bit insane. if I'm honest. Sure, it was homologated for Group A, but the turbo lag and the ferocity of it delivered more of a Group B experience than a Group A experience. Ford did address this later on with an equally powerful but smaller Garrett T34 Turbo, but only after selling 2,500 of the terrifying death machines. Now, the Escort was meant to replace the Sierra in the WRC, and it was designed to win the World Rally Championship. And it definitely failed, because it never won. It always seemed to be a championship contender, though. It just never happened. On its debut, it finished second and third, but after 6 years, only 10 WRC rallies were under its belt. It's strange. It never really achieved success. It was up there. It was up there with the Sleekas. It was up there with the Imprezas and the Evos. But it never really delivered. It's a bizarre instance where all the numbers looked right, all of the specs and all the driver comments said it was good, but it never was, I guess. And it was finally replaced by the Focus WRC in 1999. And in fact, that's the exact same thing that happened with the road car. After less than 8,000 units sold, the Escort RS was discontinued in 1996. And Ford would not see another super hot hatch until the 2002 Focus RS, and they wouldn't see an all-wheel drive super hot hatch until the 2016 Focus RS, 2 decades later. The causes of the Sierra and Escorts were anomalies in Ford. They were homologation specials dialed up to 11 with a simple engine and a massive turbo with an even massiver rear wing. It was so in your face that compared to its more refined German rivals, it looked like a builder flipping you off and then running a red light. And that's kind of their charm. Ford has never made anything like this before or since. They're almost a halo car in a completely opposite sense. The Ford GT is probably their most exclusive and coveted vehicle they have made in years. But as a halo car, it doesn't really work for the average consumer because you can't ever afford the $500,000 price tag. But this is a halo car that the average person could buy or steal.